Okay, we're reading from Canto 2, Chapter 3, text number 17. Title of the chapter is Pure Devotional Service. It's a very important chapter. It is sometimes said, there are different sections of the Bhagavatam that can be said, are said. They're the summary of the whole Bhagavatam, like the first 3 chapters of first canto, summary of the whole Bhagavatam, and the first 3 chapters of Canto 2, summary of the whole Bhagavatam. Because just review, the question that Shukadeva Goswami is asked by Maharaj Pariksith at the end of Canto 1, Chapter 9, is answered in these 3 chapters. And those 2 questions are essence of the whole Bhagavatam. What is the duty of a person about to die? And what is that subject matter that one should hear, chant, and always remember? Shrotavya kirtitavyasya dhyayas pujas chanichada, in worship. So he's answered in about 2.5 chapters. Then we hear Suta being asked by Saunaka, what did they speak about next? Because the essence of pure devotional service has been identified as that's what one should do at the time of death. It means we don't know when we're going to die throughout our life. So the exchange we heard is Suta being asked by Saunaka. Maharaj Pariksith was perfect devotee from his birth. Shukadeva Goswami was a perfect devotee from his birth. Satam is the word that's used in yesterday's verse. Pure devotee. And they were like that from the very beginning. So the topics that they were discussing surely must be in relation to Hari. And Hari Katha is the means of awakening our dormant Krishna consciousness. So Krishna Katha, please. Text 17. Both by rising and by setting, the sun decreases, harati. The sun decreases the duration of life of everyone, except one who utilizes the time by discussing topics of the all-good personality of Godhead. Uttama Shloka. Now, it doesn't mean that people who discuss topics about Krishna don't get old and don't die, or the duration of life is not diminished as each day passes. The point is, they're that much closer to transcendental life, which is the ending of the cycle of birth and death. So there's a 1.5-page purport. Nice one. This verse indirectly confirms the greater importance of utilizing the human form of life to realize our lost relationship with the Supreme Lord by acceleration of devotional service. Time and tide wait for no man. Sometimes Prabhupada would take European phrases and just use them in his purports because he's addressing the English-speaking audience, and people know these idioms. Time and tide wait for no man. So, the time indicated by the sunrise and the sunset will be uselessly wasted if such time is not properly utilized for realizing identification of spiritual values. Even a fraction of the duration of life wasted cannot be compensated by any amount of gold Human life is simply awarded to a living entity, jiva, so that, two things, he can realize his spiritual identity and his permanent source of happiness. So they can realize his spiritual identity and his permanent source of happiness. A living being, especially the human being, is seeking happiness, because happiness is the natural situation for the living entity, but he is vainly seeking happiness in the material atmosphere. A living being is constitutionally a spiritual spark of the complete whole, and his happiness can be perfectly perceived in spiritual activities. The Lord is the complete spirit whole, and his name, form, quality, pastimes, entourage, and personality are all identical with him. Once a person comes in contact with any one of the above-mentioned energies of the Lord through the proper channel of devotional service, the door to perfection is immediately opened. In Bhagavad Gita 2:40, the Lord has explained such contact in the following words, quote, "Endeavors in devotional service are never baffled, nor is there failure. A slight beginning of such activities is sufficient even to deliver a person from the greatest ocean of material fears." Unquote. What's the verse? Very good. Swalpam apyasya dharmasya nihaba kramanashosti pratyavayo nividyate. As a highly potent drug, injected intravenously acts at once on the whole body, the transcendental topics of the Lord injected through the ear of the pure devotee of the Lord can act very efficiently. Oral reception of the transcendental messages implies total realization, just as fructification of one part of a tree implies fructification of all other parts. This realization, for a moment in the association of pure devotees like Shukadeva Goswami, prepares one's complete life for eternity. And thus the sun fails to rob the pure devotee of his duration of life, inasmuch as he is constantly busy in the devotional service of the Lord, purifying his existence. So there's the explanation. How to understand that the sun's rising and setting doesn't shorten the duration of life by one day for the devotee. It does. But then it doesn't. And what's the sense that it doesn't? On the external sense, it does. But as the sun fails to rob the pure devotee of his duration of life, inasmuch as he is constantly busy in the devotional service of the Lord, purifying his existence. Death is a symptom of the material infection of the eternal living being, semicolon. Only due to material infection is the eternal living entity subjected to the law of birth, death, old age, and disease. So when that's broken, then this birth and death is broken, and the duration of life goes, the body certainly will be destroyed, but the soul goes to eternity. That's the understanding. Second paragraph. The materialistic way of pious activities like charity is recommended in the Smriti Shastras as quoted by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Money given in charity to a suitable person is guaranteed bank balance in the next life. Such charity is recommended to be given to a brahmana. If the money is given in charity to a non-brahmana or someone without brahminical qualification, the money is returned in the next life in the same proportion, like 100%, to an unqualified person. If it is given in charity to a half-educated brahmana, even then the money is returned double. If the money is given in charity to a learned and fully qualified brahmana, bigger number. The money is returned 100 and 1,000 times. And if the money is given to a Veda Paraga means one who has factually realized the path of the Vedas, it is returned by unlimited multiplication. The ultimate end of Vedic knowledge is realization of the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, as stated in Bhagavad Gita. Vedaischa Sayarvair Aham Eva Vedyo. There is a guarantee of monies being returned if given in charity, regardless of the proportion. Similarly, a moment passed in the association of a pure devotee by hearing and chanting the transcendental messages of the Lord is a perfect guarantee for eternal life, for returning home back to Godhead. Mad Dhamma Gatva Purnarjama Na Vidyate. In other words, a devotee of the Lord is guaranteed eternal life. A devotee's old age or disease in the present life is but an impetus to such guaranteed eternal life. Now, there's obviously qualifiers, like the unsuccessful yogi, supposing somebody is a devotee, or trying to become devotees. Supposing somebody is trying to become a devotee, and they don't complete. Because completing is the requirement for breaking the cycle of birth and death, or returning to Krishna eternally. Now, Krishna can make an exception and deliver Putana and others, but for us, that can be the exception. But the rule is ekanta bhakta, or ekanta bhakti. One has to become singular and focused, with one shelter and no other shelter. And commonly, material attachment means we have some shelter or some expectation of something. And even maybe, seeing necessities like food, shelter, some clothing, those necessities, physical necessities. And then there's mental and there's intellectual. It's not that we have to give up those things, but those necessities, how do they come? And if one devotes oneself to that from which everything comes, part of the execution of duties of life is those things that make some natural arrangement, reciprocal arrangement. And having received things, one offers them to the source. That's karma yoga. And then bhakti yoga is one's whole very self, body, mind, words, dedicated to the Supreme. And the matters of necessities or achieving necessities, it's understood, it's just part of the reciprocation between the servitor and the served. A very easy example: a child is maintained by their parents. And it's not the child is maintained by the parents in exchange for something that the child does for the parents. The parents supply necessities for their child because that's what parents like doing. That's their happiness. So they do. And Krishna supplies necessities, let's say, for the pure devotee who, take Prabhupada, it's very interesting. The time that he spent following his taking the Vanaprastha stage and then the sannyas stage, previously he had lots of experience in the business world, but he left it. He not only left it nominally, he left it. And essentially he had nothing, all next to nothing. I'm preparing a seminar on Light of the Bhagavad, because Light of the Bhagavad has a nice history. In 1965, Prabhupada had not yet taken sannyas. He was living in a room, a very small room. You have pictures of the size of the room, a very small room, with no toilet, no running water, no kitchen, just 4 walls. It's sterile kind of looking, typical Indian building. And he paid something to the people who owned that. It was a house, but they had a deity in their house. It's one of the 5,000 temples in Vrindavan, near Keshigat. He had next to nothing, but he was being maintained. But it was, it was a difficult time. Before he had what he had, later what he had, by Krishna's grace. But it was a difficult time. He didn't lose faith. And one of the acquaintances that he had met in Delhi, in the course of, he began, although he had no money, he began writing and printing, as following the footsteps of his spiritual master. So the Back to Godhead, just some printed pages or mimeographed pages stapled together. That's how Back to Godhead began. He would write them where he was and go to Delhi and sell them. That was his maintenance. Whatever, sometimes people would give something, but it was very meager, because he was an unknown person. He didn't have assistant, he didn't have any followers, he was like nothing. Somebody he met in Delhi gave him an invitation that he had received for an event in Japan. The event in Japan was a conference for culturing the human spirit, or something euphemistic like that. So Prabhupada wrote to the organizer requesting a letter of invitation, so he could use that letter of invitation to secure a visa to go to Japan. The man wrote back, a formal letter, the organizer of that event, inviting him to come, all expenses once you're there. But he didn't have any money for the airfare, so he didn't go. But he made an elaborate plan, thinking Bhaktisiddhanta said to the English-speaking parts of the world, but as already, he's with nothing in his pocket, but preaching outside of India. So he made a whole plan, etc., 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 etc. The plan never fructified because he didn't have any money. The history, the biographical history of who he approached, long list of people to promote the human spirit as inculcated in Vedic culture and our wonderful heritage. No support. He was an unknown person. So not too surprising, but he didn't just write letters. He went and visited these people, and here comes in their office a pure devotee. But it didn't happen. Krishna had another plan. And then later that book was published. But he was fully dependent. He wasn't whining and complaining and checking out of being the renounced person and checking back into his entrepreneurial skill, which he had, but he didn't use it because he had another purpose, another mission. So this is all about necessities, and according to different varnas and ashrams, there are different ways of seeing to necessities, but whatever the varna and whatever the ashram, the understanding should be, the reality is, necessities are supplied by the Supreme Father, not by our skills and endeavors. And it's easy to say that. It's another thing to realize that. And one of the ways that's helpful to realize that is to be deprived. Sometimes that happens. In Prabhupada's life, that's what happened. Krishna took everything away. Now what are you going to do? He didn't lose faith. He didn't whine and complain. Didn't throw in the towel. He followed what he understood as best as what he understood from what Krishna wanted, indicated by his spiritual master. So he moved in that direction. Krishna maintained him while he was in this destitute condition, what to speak of later. So the verse, the previous verse is describing Maharaj Pariksith and Shukadeva Goswami's position as pure devotees. This verse is describing the passage of time marked by the movements of the sun. In Vedic culture, that's how time is measured. There's a whole chapter in the third canto, calculation of time according to the atom. The smallest unit of time in Vedic teaching is the time it takes the sun to cross one atom, or paramanu. It's translated as atom. It's not that modern science only knew about atoms. One of the teachings, renderings of the Vedas is Kannada. It's known as the atomic theory. It's atheistic. The theory says all there is matter, and combinations of matter, and there's nothing else. So that the smallest unit of matter is an atom, and atoms combine together and make matter, and that's all there is. There's laws of how matter combines, but that's it. There's matter and the laws governing matter. Sounds familiar? Mechanistic science. Modern mechanistic science is not a new thing. So anyways, Vedas knew of time being measured by the movements of the sun in very, very tiny units, and so many of those make the next, makes the next, makes the next, makes the next. And then so the movements of the sun, because the sun, Vedic picture is, the sun is moving on the Kala Chakra, or the wheel of time, Kala Chakra. the wheel of time. And as the wheel of time is turning, the sun is moving. There's some further details. The direction that the Kala Chakra is moving is opposite the direction that the sun, God, on his chariot is moving. How's that? The sun, the sun is moving in a clockwise direction. For you, clockwise goes like this, right? No, it goes like this, clockwise. The Kala Chakra is moving in a clockwise direction. The chariot of the sun god is moving in a counterclockwise direction. Whichever the direction, counterclockwise direction. So there's the time that it takes for the sun to travel one complete revolution in a counterclockwise direction. And the sun, the Kala Chakra, is moving at such a speed that the rising and setting of the sun happens in 24 hours. Almost 24 hours. Close to 24 hours. One day. And then 1 year. It's just movements of the sun. So when the sun rises and sets, the effect is the duration of life is diminished. However, for the devotee who is engaged in service to Krishna, with each day that passes, he's that much closer to beyond the cycle of birth and death. The sun will keep moving, but the soul will stop revolving. So what's the cause of the revolving? It's turning our attention away from Krishna. So where the devotee is each day incrementally becoming more and more dedicated and purified by the process of bhakti, the cycle of birth and death is terminated. There's no more need for a body. What's the need for bodies? Like, why creation? Because we wanted it. Supposing you don't want it anymore. Well, it's not that easy. Just turn it off. The process of bhakti fills the shelter-taking in Krishna vacuum, and when it becomes full instead of a vacuum, then there's no more separate desire. There's no more need for material bodies. So for the devotee, the rising and setting of the sun means one is that much closer to eternal life. Of course, provided one is not become complacent in bhakti, but one who's attentive in bhakti. Each day that passes, one becomes that much closer. The language that's used somewhere here is proportionate to. Anyway. And the method of devotion is compared in the purport to, nice comparison, as a drug injected intravenously within the body begins to act at once on the whole body. So also sound that enters the ear acts at once on the whole body, because the consciousness of the soul pervades the body. So when spiritual sound enters the ear, it's like an intravenous acting at once on the whole body, on the whole system of our material existence. Therefore, how important is hearing Harikatha? Because that connects with the previous verse. The hearing of Harikatha was what's going to happen between Shukadeva and Maharaj Pariksith. And that Harikatha acts like a highly potent drug injected intravenously. So Saunaka knows that. He's asking Suta, please go on. Describe more. With a lot of enthusiasm. Okay, let's see if there's some discussion. All the way from Vancouver. How long was the drive? How many?
5 hours.
Oh,
Not more.
not bad. Not bad at all. Okay. We didn't welcome you yesterday, but welcome. And the rest of you came. Hare Krishna. Any discussion? Yes.
Thank you for the class, Maharaj. So how much did Parikshit Maharaj know about Krishna and his activities before meeting Shukdev?
How much did he know?
Yeah.
Enough. I mean, he was a pure devotee. It says in previous verse, from childhood, he didn't play. He saw his family members, because remember his father was already gone, Abhimanyu. But from his family members, they were worshipping a deity of Radha Krishna. So he worshipped Radha Krishna from childhood. And, he's the grandson of the Pandavas. So he got a lot of their association. So he had a lot of hearing, had a lot of bhakti, naturally so.
And is it just that he wanted to hear more and more before his death?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not information. It's churning of transcendental topics, churns transcendental emotions for a person like Maharaj Pariksith. In the association of devotees, we know from Bhagavad Gita, Kathayantas chamam nityam tushanti cha ramanti cha. That's what devotees do when devotees get together. So here's two devotees. So that when devotees are engaging with one another, it really doesn't matter. That's from previous verses. Who's speaking and who's listening. Because Maharaj Pariksith is a grahastha, Shukadev Goswami is a brahmachari, so he's inquiring from him, socially speaking. But the point that was made is they're on equal platform. So it doesn't really matter who's asking, who's answering. The etiquette was observed. So it's not like he was missing something. And that's why he was asking. He wanted to hear topics of Krishna. Because it was said that hearing the topics of Krishna, engaging in devotional service, starting with hearing and chanting, that's the duty of one who's about to die. So he wants. Not because there's something missing. He's not a sadhaka. Okay. Behind you.
Thank you, Maharaj, for having us here. Regarding this today's topic about how the soul, when we are in this material consciousness, we feel the life getting shortened with the passing of the sun, rising and setting of sun. But then when we realize our real nature, that feeling of shortening will go away, but then our connection to the Supreme makes it, So I'm trying to ask, how would it feel that it's so theoretical at this stage? It's so much theoretical, and to make the transition from the theoretical to the realization,
What's it feel like?
what it feels like and what it requires. I'm thinking it is more a lot of faith is required in that.
Well, it's the generally speaking, the process is gradual. The gradual is often compared to the rising of the sun. Every morning, it's darkness, and then there's twilight, and then there's the rising of the sun. And it's gradual. Similarly, the awakening is that there's two things: the removal of the covering of darkness, and the awakening of the light of sense of connection. What it feels like is both. The affinity for the temporary diminishes, and simultaneously the natural attraction for Krishna increases. You know, that the operative principle is the attraction for Krishna increases. And as the attraction for Krishna increases, the attraction for the temporary diminishes. One doesn't need a separate step. You have a dimmer switch, you start turning the light on, the darkness is dispelled. The business is turning the light on so that you can see. So the attraction for Krishna is the experience. And as the attraction for Krishna comes, vidhunoti saritsatam. You know, Krishna acts like the janitor. You know, Krishna, situated in the heart, cleanses the heart of misgivings and, you know, attachment for the temporary because of one's efforts to become attached to him, the eternal. So that's what it feels like. Affinity for the temporary diminishing. It's the classic example, or one of the classic examples given in the Bhagavatam, is the experience, a comparison is made. The experience of one who's been fasting for some time and then breaks the fast. So from fasting for some time, there's hunger, the body may be a little weak. You fast for some time. There's a weakness in the limbs of the body. When you break the fast, that weakness subsides, the hunger subsides, and one feels a satisfaction after some point in time. It's no thanks, I don't need anything more. So using that as a metaphor, what it's like is similar by the process of hearing. Specifically, the verse in the Bhagavatam says that the method is the process of hearing, and from the process of hearing, these similar three things happen. Desire to be engaged in service, bhakti, para isha anubhav, feelings, anubhav, for para isha, and viraktir anyatra syat, detachment from other things. And it's one can experience it as much as eating one can experience. Hunger subsiding, strength returning to the limbs of the body, satisfaction at a certain point in time. So satisfaction in the bhakti. The heart's hankering for contentment that's not temporal. Okay. Something else? You have something up front?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In this purport, the charity is also mentioned.
Which is mentioned?
Charity.
Charity,
that how much it is returned in next life.
Yes, it is.
And Bhagavad Gita chapter 18 also talks about, and there Prabhupada says that we should do a charity to a qualified Brahmana. My question is, how is it returned to a sadhaka devotee in the next life? Is it exactly the same, or
Is it practically the same?
exactly? Or the reason I'm asking is, let's say the sadhakas who goes back to the Godhead, then if we are doing a karma, then how is that charity is returned?
It depends on the consciousness. And here's an explanation on that answer. King Nriga. King Nriga was a bhakta, and King Nriga was a karmakandi at the same time. He was a mixed devotee. He had attraction for Krishna, and he had attraction for becoming the enjoyer of his charity. And boy, did he do charity. So when he became a lizard and Krishna liberated him, Krishna asked, who are you and how'd you get in this lizard body? He told this story. And at the end, what happened was Krishna, a vimana from the heavenly realm, because he came out of the body of a lizard in a demigod-looking body with opulence and attire and everything. A vimana from the heavenly realm took him to the heavenly realm. Although he had attraction for Krishna, he saw Krishna. Then Krishna said, it's in the commentary, it's not in the verse, Krishna said, after you fulfill your desired happiness in the heavenly realm for so much charity that you gave, then you'll come to me. Because it was mixed. Now, it's certainly possible that a mixed can become unmixed, like Dhruva. But King Nriga, that's not what happened. He didn't do all of what Dhruva did, and the outcome was he still had some expectation. And so that was fulfilled. So back to your question about charity, what about someone who is a devotee that does charity? It depends on their consciousness. That's the answer. Something will come, but in what form it will come depends on consciousness. Let's do Jarasandha. Jarasandha was known, he had a reputation for giving charity to brahmanas. He did lots of charity to brahmanas. What was his purpose? From the charity he got kriti, and he used it for bad purposes. He was duskriti. The consciousness in his charity giving determined the outcome. So the essence is the consciousness. Charity is to be done. It's a ubiquitous understanding. Grahastas are to give charity. So that's the duty. Now, some people give charity because they're going to get something. I know people like that, without examples. And there are some persons that do because it's duty, and some persons do that because this is for the pleasure of Krishna. My life is for the pleasure of Krishna. So consciousness determines what's the outcome of charity for a devotee.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Bhagavatam is addressing this type of charity which will bring back some in the next life. Although we understand Bhagavatam is pure bhakti based. So how to reconcile, how to understand this? But when somebody reads it, he will get that idea of, I want to give charity in order to get something back in the next life. So could you please?
Yeah. You take the bigger picture of what the Bhagavatam is saying, and the bigger picture is very clear. And over here, as part of the bigger picture, there's theistic conduct that's not spoken, It's part of the Vedas. It's part of a life of a cultured person. It's not every single verse is entirely speaking about absolute transcendence only. That which leads to absolute transcendence is also part of the topics of the Bhagavatam. While at the same time giving very clear indication that's not adequate. It's insufficient. So it doesn't speak against charity or indirect. It's very specific, even in these first 3 chapters. Indirect is meant to bring one to the direct. It's not silent on the indirect. Making wet wood into dry is for the purpose of igniting the wood or using it for other purpose, building a house. So it's, making wet wood dry has a purpose. Then one should understand the indirect is to bring the direct. And the Bhagavatam is really thorough in that regard. Now, is it possible someone can take it, hey, it's now authorized? Yes, it's possible. But they're not taking a look at the whole picture of what the Bhagavatam is. They're cherry-picking according to their attachments. Okay. Something else? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki.